international group. Thank you, Dr. Stanton.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. I think I mentioned to some of you that I've been very devoted to Amnesty International really all my professional life and was very active in Amnesty. In fact, before I started Genocide Watch. In fact, just before I started Genocide Watch, I was the Congo co-group coordinator for AI USA. And in that role, I actually went to some, big national amnesty meetings. And one of the things that I was concerned about was that Amnesty's mandate at that time was fairly limited. It really focused on prisoners of conscience, on torture and opposition to the death penalty. And that's fine. And that's very important, of course, still core Amnesty mandate. But it struck me because I had just been through working against genocide in the State Department and setting up the Rwandan Tribunal, that Amnesty's mandate needed to be broader than that. It needed to be able to really address all of the human rights violations under the two covenants, under the International Covenant for Political and Civil Rights and under the Covenant for Social and Cultural Rights. And so I proposed to our leaders who are in New York that they make a proposition to the international amnesty that the mandate be broadened to include that both of those covenants, and for that matter, the Genocide Convention. So they did. It passed. I remember in Nashville, we had a vote on it, and it passed overwhelmingly. And so it went up to London and it was approved there. So that's why Amnesty now has the broad mandate that it does. One thing that I realized after I was in the State Department working on genocide was that we didn't have any world movement on this issue. There were Holocaust museums. There were very good human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, but not a single organization existed that was focused solely on the prevention of genocide. And the reason why that was a real problem for me is that genocide killed more people in the 20th century than all of the wars combined. Our estimate is at least 170 million people died from genocide. And that was all kinds of genocide, mostly committed by governments against people in their own territories, also committed, however, by mobs of people who were carrying out ethnic mass murder in places like India, where during partition, that happened on both sides. And so what we had, in fact, was a very, very deep human problem that needed to be addressed, just the way slavery needed to be addressed. There wasn't an anti-slavery movement before the founders of that. And we needed something similar to that. We needed something that would really take on this huge problem. Now, in order to take it on, the first thing you have to do is understand it. So I was also very active, and we founded the International Association of Genocide Scholars, which was a group that started out with 34 members from, universities and so forth around the world, but particularly in America, Israel, and Europe. And that organization has grown since then to a membership of over 500 scholars around the world. And we study genocide, how genocide happens, why it happens, things of that sort. During my work on genocide, I had come up with a real model for how genocide develops. The reason that that model has had an impact is because it's comprehensible to people. It's simple enough that people can understand it. And yet it is based on very sophisticated social science. It's structural anthropology at its best, I think. It is called the 10 Stages of Genocide. And it's based on essentially process anthropology. It is based on a view of what are the processes that can result in genocide. And it shows you that there's a logic in the process. And you can look it up on our website, genocidewatch.com. So I won't go into a lot of detail on it, but I can just list the 10 stages. The first is classification, where it's you classify the world into us versus them. The second is symbolization, where you name those groups, or you even sometimes give physical symbols to the groups. The yellow star is the most famous, of course, but it's used in a lot of other genocides as well. The third stage, and when I say stage, keep in mind that it's not a linear model. In other words, these are more like, it's more like a circle, really, where these are processes which, as they get closer and closer and are pushed further and further in, like a nuclear bomb, they push further and further in toward the center, they reinforce each other. And they eventually, when they reach the center, you have an explosion, you have a genocide. So this is the way to think about this model. The third stage or process is discrimination, where governments will literally have laws that discriminate against certain groups. The fourth is dehumanization, where the targeted group is really treated as though it was not human. And in every genocide, this occurs. You have the Nazis calling the Jews vermin. You have the Hutus calling the Tutsis cockroaches. I mean, these are the sorts of, this is the kind of language you have. But it's not, sometimes it's much more subtle than that. I mean, having people called insects or rats and so forth, well, that's pretty obvious. But you can also just call them illegal aliens. Have you ever wondered about what planet those illegal aliens come from? Or you might just call them the people who are coming across the border, robbers and rapists. Or you can call them all kinds of other names. So this whole idea, and that somehow these people are not really part of us, and we would be better off without them. That's what is going on with dehumanization. And that is really where the downward spiral into genocide begins. You then have organization, which is where hate groups organize. We have plenty of them here in the United States, as you know, as the Southern Poverty Law Center has documented thoroughly. But every time you see these hate groups rise up, and they do, you have to scream bloody murder. You got to make it clear this is a criminal organization that is organizing here. And I know a little bit about that because I was a civil rights worker in Mississippi in 1966, and the Klan used to follow us around. One night they shot up our house, in fact, and wounded a couple of my friends. I was in the back room cooking dinner, but that was a terrorist group, and it still is. This Klan's not dead. So organization is required for genocide to happen because it is not an individual crime. It is a group crime. The stage after that is where the organized group tries to polarize the society. They'll have propaganda campaigns to spread all kinds of lies about the targeted group. They will try to claim that anybody in the middle, the moderates, are actually part of the enemy. If you're not with us, you're against us. That kind of reasoning is what is then used by these organizing groups for a genocide. You then have preparation, where the people who are planning the genocide actually plan it. The most famous cases, of course, are the Wannsee Conference before the Holocaust, some of the meetings of the Akazu in Rwanda and so forth that planned that genocide. Genocides are not accidents. After that, you have persecution, serious persecution, in which the group that is targeted is rounded up, sent off to concentration camps, maybe imprisoned. They'll kill the leaders. They'll take away their means of existence, herd them into ghettos, all of these sorts of things, march them out into deserts. This kind of persecution is really the beginning of the genocide itself, because it includes genocidal massacres. And then finally, you get to what I call the extermination stage. I use that term because the people who are committing a genocide often think they're actually doing good. They think they're ridding the body politic of a disease, or of getting rid of some kinds of pests or animals, or that are really, really a terrible problem for the whole society. Extermination is the word we use for that, and in law, it is called genocide. That's where you actually have genocide. So I thought, well, that's it, right? Unfortunately, it's not. I realized after I'd written the stage theory that there was yet another stage, and it's denial. The final stage of every genocide is denial. And actually, it isn't just the final stage, because you have denial all the way through the whole process. Begins at the beginning and goes all the way through after the genocide's over, and it can go on for 100 years or more. Turkey, for instance, still denies that the Turkish state committed the Armenian genocide. And we, unfortunately, have denied for most of our history that we committed genocide against the Native Americans and against African Americans. And we did both. So that's the basic process of genocide. So how do you stop it? How do you prevent it? Well, at each of these stages, there are things you can do to prevent it. When you have a classification system, for instance, that is one that is coupled with discrimination against a whole group, you can outlaw that. You can, for instance, in our constitutional law in the United States now, you can impose what is called strict scrutiny on any classification system that uses race. And that, of course, was a development that only developed in the 1950s in the Warren Court. Those kinds of legal developments are really important for demolishing classification systems that are invidious. Each of these stages, in other words, has a way that you can counter it. So the question then is, okay, so what do you do internationally about genocide? Because a lot of the problems occur in other countries. Well, that was the problem that we took on when I organized Genocide Watch in 1999. I looked around, and there wasn't a single organization out there in the entire world that was mainly focused on preventing genocide. I was really kind of amazed at that. As my law professor at Yale, Mars McDougall, said when I talked to him about this, he said he was a Mississippi gentleman, and so he sort of got back in his chair like this, and he says, "Well, Greg, why don't you do it?" And I said, "But I'm just a law student." He said, "Yes, son, but you're a Yale law student," which of course is Ivy League arrogance at its very worst. But it was exactly the kind of encouragement I needed. And so that's what we did. We organized not only the Cambodian Genocide Project, which of course was the first project that I had started at Yale in '82, but then Genocide Watch. Well, at the same time we started Genocide Watch, we started what is now called Alliance Against Genocide, because the people who were advising me about how to start this said, don't start another Pentagon, don't start another hierarchical institution, don't start a pyramid. Instead, start a network. And so that's what we did. So the Alliance Against Genocide is a network, and it now has organizations all around the world. We have 75 member organizations, and some of them are pretty big, like International Crisis Group and Minority Rights Group and groups like that. And many of them have offices all over the world. So that's the beginning of an alliance. If you want to see a real alliance, you'll take a look at what Bill Pace was able to organize. He was the head of the World Federalist Movement. When he was able to organize the International Coalition for the International Criminal Court. That organization, that alliance, that coalition now has over 2,000 members around the world, 2,000 member organizations around the world. That is what we need. In fact, I asked Bill to, in fact, be the first head of Genocide Watch. He said, "Oh, I've got too much to do with this ICC work." But he, in fact, I really think he should get the Nobel Peace Prize at some point for what he's done. I mean, the International Criminal Court is part of what he produced. So that's our objective. We want to start a mass movement that will result in several things. First of all, genocide occurs because we do not yet have the international institutions to stop it and prevent it. The UN has the Perm 5 veto, so in the Security Council. So it's very often paralyzed in trying to prevent genocide. Not always. There are some things, sometimes you can actually get the Security Council to do things that are helpful. For instance, in Macedonia, we were able to get a Security Council resolution through that put a very small UN peacekeeping force right on the border with Kosovo, because we didn't want that civil war to spill over into Macedonia, and it worked. They patrolled the border and kept it from spilling over. Also, regional organizations have the power under Chapter 8 of the UN Charter to take action, even if they don't have UN Security Council approval yet. They're supposed to then submit whatever they do to the Security Council for evaluation, but the point is they can act before they have that authorization. So actually, regional organizations are often the best solution if intervention is needed. But of course, intervention isn't really always the best way to prevent a genocide. Preventing it from inside a country is far more effective, because if you can start a process in a country that will resist the forces of genocide, you're way further ahead than if you have to wait for an international intervention. In other words, we also need genocide education. So that's the second thing that we don't have enough of. We don't have the international institutions. We also don't have enough education about genocide to teach people what genocide is. It should be part of the curriculum in every secondary school in America, in my opinion, and for that matter, around the world, to teach people about this seriously deep human problem and universal human problem. People ask me, so why does genocide occur? And I say, well, it's because of the ethnocentric nature of human beings. We are all born into a culture with a particular language and so forth, and demagogic leaders can get people to believe that their culture and they ethnocentrically are somehow superior to other people. That's really the origin of it. It's sort of racism on steroids is what happens. That's what causes genocide. The third thing that we need, of course, is to engage governments. We need to get political will behind actually preventing and stopping genocide. When you look at why the world has not stopped genocide, the main answer is the countries of the world haven't had the political will to do it. There will always be some excuse. It isn't in our national interest. What, why would we get involved in that? I heard that a lot in the State Department. And when people try to explain to me why we weren't using the UN peacekeeping force that was already there in Rwanda. Instead, we actually voted to pull them out at the beginning of that genocide. And I was in the State Department then, and I was a dissenter. The reasoning is that, look what happened to us in Somalia, where we lost 18 people in the Black Hawk Down incident. And that had just happened a little bit before the Rwandan genocide. Well, goodness gracious, was that the right reasoning? I don't think so. Instead, what we said was, oh no, we're not only not going to contribute troops to try to stop this genocide. And by the way, this is something very few people know. I knew it because I had classified, clearance. We had over 10,000 Marines on ships off the coast of East Africa when the Rwandan genocide began in April of 1994. Can you imagine? My son served in the Marines. I do not think that if you'd sent those Marines into Rwanda, that genocide would have gone on for very long at all. And it wasn't, of course, just up to the US. We already had UN troops in there. We could have had the French, we could have had African countries were horrified at this genocide, and they would have given the troops too. So the question then is, where do we get the political will? Well, I think one of the things is we have to move genocide way up high on the agenda of international leaders. You don't hear it talked about. It just never came up in this past campaign, for instance. And that's not the only campaign where it hasn't come up. I remember the Bush-Gore election, and they had a debate, and somebody asked about genocide, and neither one of them endorsed really a proactive approach. In other words, we have a problem there with political will. Now, we've had some successes, and I can point to them. I think there was success when Nigeria and the African Union and the Economic Community of West African States intervened in Sierra Leone and Liberia and finally stopped those genocidal killings. We had success when Indonesia was involved in the genocide in East Timor, and ASEAN and especially Australia took the lead and got approval to stop that genocide. As I say, we had some success in Macedonia, and I would say in Kosovo also, where it took a NATO intervention. But for the most part, we have failed. You take a look at what has happened in Syria. I mean, my goodness sakes, at least 500,000 people have died there. And we have, what has been happening in Sudan, where the numbers of dead are well over 500,000, and it's still going on. Or in South Sudan. I mean, I could list off, as you know, unfortunately, too many cases. So those are the kinds of things we need to look at if we're going to try to stop genocide. Well, so people then ask me, okay, well, what do you specifically recommend for us, you and me here locally? I mean, what can we do? Well, one of the reasons I'm so happy to be talking to an Amnesty group, one of the first things I say is resist nationalism. Resist nationalism. Nationalism is one of the most evil forces that has caused more war and more genocides than nearly any other force in history. There are others, however, as you know. Marx's Leninism has cost tens of millions of lives. Nazism has cost tens of millions of lives. But nationalism has probably cost even more. When you see people saying America first, just ask them what they mean. Does that mean we're not part of the human race? Seriously. I believe there's only one race, the human race. And these divisions we make between people are our inventions. I also believe that we need to prosecute people who are planning and committing genocides. That's why I'm such a strong supporter of the International Criminal Court. But it's not just that court that's going to be able to do this. We need to make genocide and planning for genocide, complicity, aiding and abetting, part of a crime of universal jurisdiction. It is already, by the way, a crime of universal jurisdiction to participate in or aid or abet or be complicit or commit genocide in the United States, in Australia, in most of Europe. In other words, it is already a crime of universal jurisdiction. So, by the way, as you may know, is torture. I would like to see some of the people who were putting those children in cages down along the southern border, who are ordering that to be done. I'd like to see them charged with torture. I'd like to see them put on trial. And you could actually do that in this country in a court where you had a gutsy enough prosecutor to indict them. I'd also like to see the decision-making taken out of the stovepipes, open up the process, make decision-making no longer just secret, make policymakers have to answer for their decisions. So those are some of the solutions that I would like. And I also believe that each of us, because each of us is also able to act, and this is why Amnesty's work is so important, by getting those who are human rights advocates in other countries out of prison, supporting them, protecting them, you are doing a huge service to the cause of opposing genocide, because those are the people who will oppose it. And I just want to end with the observation that I believe that this movement against genocide is eventually going to have the same kind of impact that the anti-slavery movement had. I don't know if it's going to be the most important revolution, though. Personally, I think the most important revolution of all is the women's liberation movement. And I actually think they're connected. Have you ever wondered why it is that not one genocide or war in world history has ever been planned by women? It's the war, it's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. Now, some would say, oh, it's because they haven't had political power. But that's not really quite true, is it? There have been some pretty powerful queens in history, and there have been others. But, you know, it's also because women have a different way of handling conflict than men. I'm a very committed feminist, I have to tell you. It's part of my background, I guess, because Elizabeth Cady Stanton was one of my ancestors. But when women have conflict, they talk. When men have conflict, they fight. Now, I think talking is a lot better way of resolving conflict than fighting. So that is why I think women's empowerment is going to be the most important contribution we can make to ending war and genocide. So on that, I will end my talk. Now I've seen I haven't taken up these things as I've gone along, but I will now. There's really a lot of, there's some comments here in the chat that I'd like to deal with. Yes, this is very good. Bridget says that the term genocide has been reserved for mass killing, while ethnic cleansing seems to accomplish the same thing, but over time. But that term has no international recognition as being illegal. That's right. Ethnic cleansing has no legal meaning. In other words, it was invented by Slobodan Milosevic as a euphemism to cover up genocide. I think it should be deleted from the legal lexicon of the world. It has no legal meaning. In fact, what it is it's a term used for genocide denial. Whenever you see the UN using the word ethnic cleansing, or the New York Times, or anybody else, it's because they don't want to use the real name for it, which is genocide. Sometimes it, of course, isn't genocide. Sometimes it's forced displacement, but that's also a crime against humanity. It's outlawed by the Rome Statute of the ICC. You're absolutely right about that. In other words, what is called ethnic cleansing, which is really a name for forced displacement in some people's minds, is part of the persecution process that comes right, is part of and often comes right with genocide. That's what's happened to the Rohingya, of course. I mean, they not only were victims of genocide, which is, and let me talk a little more about that. It's not just mass killing, remember. The Genocide Convention says the following acts are acts of genocide. This is Article 2 of the convention. The first is killing members of the group, yes. But the second is causing serious mental or bodily harm to members of the group. The third is creating conditions of life that are aimed at the destruction of the group. So, the Trail of Tears, which was exactly that, where we forced all the Native Americans, in the eastern United States to march into Oklahoma at the loss of thousands of lives. That was genocide, no doubt about it. And then we also, of course, had actual taking away of the children of the group. The schools that educated Native Americans, so-called the Indian schools, where they wouldn't let them speak their languages, and they were trying to turn them all into little white people. That's genocide. And finally, of course, preventing births within the group is also genocide. So if you have forced sterilization and all those kinds of crimes, which are happening right now to the Uyghurs in China, that's genocide. So it isn't just mass killing, of course, that constitutes genocide. Now, let me just go through a couple of these other comments because I see how they really are close. I do believe, Mohammed has asked me, is education or a higher level of literacy a solution to genocide? Yes, I believe it is. In other words, I think that it is very important for people to be able to read, to be literate and so forth, because it opens the world to them. It doesn't, however, mean that an educated person is incapable of genocide. A very large percentage of the inner circle of the Nazi Party in Germany had PhDs, and there were lawyers. If you want to watch a really chilling film, watch one called Conspiracy, which it's a reenactment of the Wannsee Conference, in which they planned the Holocaust. They have Heydrich and Eichmann. It's a real, it was actually made from the transcript of the real Wannsee Conference. And one of the scariest things about that movie is it was a conference of very educated men. All men, notice. So yes, I do think education is crucial, and part of it should be genocide education. And then we have another question here about the situation with China and the Uyghurs. That is very clearly genocide, in my opinion. Now, how to stop it? Again, here you have the problem that the UN faces. China is one of the Perm Five. We'll never get a UN resolution on this. However, and this is something I would like you to remember. In 1950, when we faced the fact that we would have a veto on doing something about North Korea's invasion of South Korea, the Russians were going to veto it. Russia made the mistake of walking out of the Security Council. And so they passed a resolution called the Uniting for Peace Resolution. And the Uniting for Peace Resolution is still on the books. It's still law. It's still international law. And under that resolution, if a majority of the members of the Security Council vote that they cannot take action because of the veto, they can send a situation that is a threat to international peace and security to the General Assembly. And the General Assembly then, by a 2/3 vote, can authorize forceful action, military action. And that is how the Korean police action, that's why it's called police action, was authorized. And that resolution has been used 13 times. It was used in the Suez Crisis, in the Congo. A lot of people don't know this. It's still there. It could still be used. I think it should be used. Now, of course, the US doesn't like it. We were the ones that introduced it in the first place. We don't like it anymore because we don't have a veto. But by God, we ought to use it. And, it's right there to be used. The other thing I always like to point out is that Chapter 8 does authorize regional organizations to take action, even if you can't get Security Council to take action. Now, I do understand what is meant in this question about the size of countries being a real hindrance to trying to prevent genocide in them. Now, here's a question from Louisa, a very interesting question. The term genocide has been a victim of verbal inflation, and has it lost its initial meaning by becoming commonplace? I think there is some real truth to that, because sometimes for instance, I remember when the Bhopal chemical disaster happened in India, and everybody said, oh, that's genocide. I said, no, it's not. It wasn't intentional. Now, you can claim, I think, with good reason, that it was reckless, because Union Carbide had plenty of knowledge that that could happen, and they should have been charged with reckless, that it was a reckless act. But it was not intentional. Therefore, it was not genocide to have all those chemicals, spilled in Bhopal that killed so many people. So yes, that's verbal inflation. I actually think, though, on the other hand, that the term genocide is not used enough. And the reason I say that is this. If you have an all or none concept of genocide, and most lawyers do, they say, oh, if you can't prove the intent to destroy the group, and the acts are not quite apparent yet, then we can't use the word genocide. My point is, we better start using the word that there's a danger of genocide, a risk of genocide, long before it happens. Otherwise, we will not be able to stop it, because once it's underway, it is very hard to stop. So I actually think using the word more would be a good thing. It's just that we should talk about genocide alerts or genocide warnings. That's what Genocide Watch does. We shouldn't say this is a genocide right now, necessarily. Just watch out for it, and then take these steps to try to stop it. Now here we have, in India about cow crimes against people who eat beef and so. Yes, I know. I lived in India for a year, and of course, I loved India. But I know I was in Varanasi and I actually watched a cow walk out of the quality restaurant in Varanasi. I've never seen that before, out of the doorway. But yes, I do know that. Can the veto power be changed in the UN? Well, there's only two ways I can think of. One is for the great powers, the Perm 5, to agree to some kind of a treaty in which they would agree that if the majority of the members of the UN Security Council designated a situation to be genocide, they would not exercise their veto. I do not think there's a whole lot of chance that will happen. I think it would take a major shift in consciousness for that to happen. But the second way out is the Uniting for Peace resolution, which is a way around the veto, and hardly anybody even thinks of it. Okay, so that's plenty. I think you need to wrap up, so you might want to have more open discussion at this point.
Let's see. Are there any? Did we miss any questions? Any important questions? I think that's what we have, right?
I
There
think
was
you
a
got them.
question, Dr. Stanton. There was a question from Suniti regarding, how do we prevent genocide? How do we combat such the attitude? When countries are really powerful, like China and India, and we see these different stages of genocide, right before our eyes,
Right.
but these are powerful countries.
Very.
How do we combat that?
Well, my answer to that comes out of my experience with the breakup of the Soviet Union. I was legal advisor to the Ukrainian independence movement. So I saw what could be done when you take some of the basic methods of nonviolent resistance and use them in situations where people are oppressed by tyranny. And they are amazingly powerful. The Ukrainian independence movement asked me to go represent a couple of people who have been arrested. And of course, at first I said, how on earth can I do that? I'm not even a member of the Ukrainian Bar Association. They said, don't worry about that. We'll take care of that. Not being a member, but you organize the international pressure and we'll take care of the courts here. But they were arresting so many people, they asked me to come to Ukraine. And they said, what should we do? And I said, well, I was trained by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and they taught us you should always make injustice personal. So let's look at who is being arrested. And we will first of all in this case, they'd arrested actual members of parliament in the Rada, in the Ukraine's parliament. Let's take other members of parliament who belong to the opposition, and we're going to go down to the prison where they're holding those people. By the way, it was the same prison where Lenin had been held under the czars, would you believe? Anyway, we went down there and I said, believe me, they're not going to let us see them. But then what we're going to do is we're going to go back up here to up Krashatik, and we're going to go up to the center of town, to the Maidan, and we're going to have a huge rally. And we had 5,000 people at that rally. And we're going to announce that from now on, we're going to march down there every single week. But first, we got to train everybody in nonviolent resistance, and that takes training. You have to be willing to get beaten on the head with a truncheon and not react violently. And that's kind of hard. So we did that. And so then we started marching down there every Friday to the prison. We had the column with the ladies on the outside with flowers, and the OMA and the secret police, lining the way, not really willing to use their truncheons on these lovely ladies who are dressed up and everything else. I mean, there are some ways that, frankly, the differences between women and men can be used very powerfully. I like that myself. And then on the inside of them were these huge Eastern Ukrainian miners, mostly Russian speaking. These huge guys from the coal mines and stuff. And then on the middle was, all of us cowards. Anyway, we went down to prison. Of course, they wouldn't let us see them at first, and we just have another rally. Anyway, in fact, I think I'll just say one more thing. My favorite rally of them all was one day they told me that the rally was banned, it was outlawed. So I could go to prison for 5 years if I spoke. And I thought about it, and I prayed about it. And my speeches, by the way, were being translated by the head of the Ukrainian independence movement, who was the best poet in Ukraine. So, I would just write this ordinary speech and it would come out poetry to all these people. And they would go bananas, you know, they would just go wild, you know. It was so beautiful. Anyway, so, but at this rally, I got a copy of the Declaration of Independence, the American Declaration of Independence. And I read to that huge, huge crowd, 5,000 people. I read the first 3 paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. And of course, it was in Ukrainian. They went wild. Those words are just as revolutionary today as they were then. So I believe that the best way to handle tyrannical regimes in these places like China and India is resistance from within.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you very much, Stanton. This was really amazing, and hope you can come back maybe in a few months because this subject is really so vast, and there's so much that can be done, you know, by even a small group like us. So we'll love to have you back again.
Well, thank
All
you.
right. All right. So now it's up to you if you can stay on and listen to what Bridget has to tell us, or you can
I'd
drop
love to
off.
hear it.
Okay. So hey, Ruth, can you share Bridget's bio on your from your computer, and I will introduce her. All right. There we go. So Bridget is right here, a local longtime resident of Houston. She is an activist and is involved with several different organizations. She has been engaged in political activism since she was in graduate school in University of Memphis when she demonstrated in opposition to the first Gulf War and marching in support of civil liberties. She is active in her local neighborhood and faith communities. After her mother traveled to Israel and Palestine for her 80th birthday with the organization Friends of Sabeel North America, Bridget decided to go on a similar delegation with Interfaith Peace Builders in May of 2017. She returned with the same organization, now called Eyewitness Palestine, on an alumni delegation in February of 2019. She wanted to go on the second delegation mostly to return to Hebron, Al-Khalil, to see people associated with the organization, Youth Against Settlements. At today's meeting, she has a request to help has a request for our membership to help one of the activists in the organization. She will give a brief synopsis of the situation and explain what we can do to help. So, Bridget, welcome to our group meeting. And, uh, you know, the slides that you have, you can share it from your computer. If there's an issue, we have them too.
Okay, well, thank you so much for accepting my request to come on and talk this evening to the group. And it seems especially relevant to the situation of genocide because we talk about these powerful countries such as China and India, and I would put in there Israel as well, and what's happening with the Palestinian people as genocide after what I have seen there. And I really liked how you ended your discussion just now about always make injustice personal. And so that's what I'm doing right now in wanting to talk to y'all about a particular activist. His name is Issa Amro, and who is in Hebron. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of the situation there, kind of my role, and who he is, and what we might be able to do. So actually, Amnesty International did have a letter writing campaign for this gentleman, Issa Amro, back in 2017. Interestingly, that was just a few months after I'd gone on my first visit. So this is not out of the blue for Amnesty International. In fact, again, in 2019, there's been some the Middle East, North Africa person is writing about all of what he's going through. So I just want to kind of, I'll try to just share my slides to make Isa a person that you can relate with. So hopefully I'll be able to do this. If I can present this. Is that coming up for y'all? I can't see you, so hopefully someone will say yes.
No, it didn't come up.
It didn't come up?
I'll see it, yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can, I don't know if I have the, can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it telling you that you're not allowed to?
No, it's not saying that.
Okay.
It's
All right.
just, let's see. Oh, let's try this. Well, it doesn't matter. I don't need to do that just to tell you about him.
Do you want me to run the slides?
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
I just don't want to. I want to get back. Sorry, I'm being. Well, maybe I can do this. Is that? coming
Yay.
up?
Oh, there we go.
Oh, is that kind
It
of
is.
coming up?
Yeah.
So can you?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't know what y'all see or not. Do you see that now?
Yes.
The screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's me over there with Isa, who is giving a tour of, I say Hebron, and Al Khalil is the Arabic name for the town. So he gives these tours because in Hebron in 1994, February 25th is when there was a massacre in the Ibrahimi Mosque. And then after that, you can imagine the clashes that were happening. And so the town got split up into two parts. One is Palestinian controlled and one is under the control of the Israeli military. And there's been increasingly limited movement of Palestinians. And this was what's called Al-Shahada Street, which had been the main market, but now all the shops have been closed down, and people can't, parts of it, you can even see there's some soldiers back in the background there. Parts of it, they can't even walk down. So that's the situation in Hebron. And Isa has, even in 2012, he was arrested and detained 20 times. And so he just faces a lot of harassment. And so what's happening right now is he's had a case, he has 18 charges against him that have been working their way in the Israeli military court. And what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks is that the judge is going to make a decision on those. And so part of our letter, so that's part of our letter writing campaign, is to talk about kind of the charges are kind of crazy too. So anyway, I just want to go on to the next slide as well. So one of the charges has to do with not having a permit for a march, and which is not an international offense by any means. So and this is a march for open Shahada Street demonstrations. That's something that he organizes. And they have this center that he was a founder of this Youth Against Settlements, which is dedicated to nonviolent resistance. And the whole thing of Palestinians is something called sumud, which is steadfastness. And so it's like existence is resistance. And so they're not going to get pushed out of their homes and such. And so the parts of the open Shahada Street demonstrations involve, having children dance. And one of the things he tries to do also is a lot of the international organizations that had been in Hebron that would escort children to and from schools because they were being harassed by the settlers and also by the military. So now that's something else that Youth Against Settlements does, is they are now escort, and they wear these vests to indicate that. In fact, they've been recognized as a human rights organization. And also he gives excuse me, birthday parties for the kids and that kind of thing. So you can see real radical stuff here. So I'm going to stop sharing right now just because. So that's basically who he is and how I interacted with him. So what's happening right now is actually, like I said, he's dealing with two things. He's dealing with the Israeli military court. Like I said, has all these charges that, and they're targeting him is what's happening, because they know that they can't stand up to nonviolent resistance. And so they're targeting him and are going to make a decision the next couple of weeks. The other thing he's fighting is that the Palestinian Authority has leveled some charges against him because he was critical of the Palestinian Authority for something about a journalist that they had arrested a journalist, and so they basically are saying they're using these old the Electronic Crimes Act, and that he was disturbing public order because he was saying you're anyway. So he's dealing with two different things, both on the Israeli military side and also the Palestinian Authority. So what I know that right on December 10th is the big right to rights. Let's say that 10 times. Anyway, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to get some letters that you can either use as samples or sign on to. Right now, I'm trying to, the groups are trying to figure out, is it better to have one letter that everybody signs on to and just adds their name, or to have individually written letters? So, but I think Mohammed will be able to include that. I think he's going to be sending out an email in the next day or two, and we'll have something about that. So if you can, please, what we plan to do is send these to Issa's lawyer, so that the lawyer then can present them to the courts. So thank you. If you have questions, I'd be glad to answer anything. And I hope that was clear enough. I know it's rather vague because a lot of the charges are rather, frivolous in some ways.
So Bridget, so when you send me the sample letter, we will share it with our group here, and we'll just ask folks to print them at home or make any changes and then they will ask them to mail it. In the past, like last December, we actually had a holiday party at a restaurant, and we had I believe Bob, we had 10 different letters that our members signed, and we mailed it. I think with a total of more than 120 letters were mailed from our Right for Rights event last December. So we plan to do something similar. Unfortunately, with this pandemic, it's kind of difficult to do it, but we're gonna figure out some ways. We also talked about for folks who may not be able to print them at home. What we are gonna do is we are gonna print a stack of them and leave it at a restaurant right here in where we live. So folks can just go by the restaurant, pick up a copy, take it home, and then mail it. Yeah,
If I might add, it was interesting, this last time I was there, there was a whole bag of letters that Amnesty International members from around the world had written to Issa when he'd been in detention. And so I know that Amnesty International people write letters. So thank you all for doing that.
And does anybody have any questions for Bridget? Okay, then.
If I might just add that he has been, just to say that it's not just this one person who's doing it. There's people all around Palestine and the West Bank who are active in doing things. It's just that he is a person who has attention because he was a recipient of the UN Human Rights Defender of the Year in Palestine award. So he's gotten some attention already. So this is why we're focusing on him, because he actually has some international attention.
Do you want to spend a minute or two and talk about Eyewitness Palestine? Is it an organization that we, our members, can make a donation to, or help that organization somehow?
Well, what that organization does is it has a lot of partners who are there in Israel, Palestine, and they basically lead people over there on trips to see for themselves, because they think that seeing and talking with people there is the best way to understand the situation. And so they themselves, I mean, they don't actually do the work themselves, but they have partners there who do a lot of work. Their role, so right now with the pandemic, they haven't been able to actually go on their delegations, like the olive harvest has just been happening. And so they haven't been able to do that. A lot of other organizations may go over there and do that. But so now they're doing these virtual delegations, which is great. And so whether it be, you know, right now we couldn't even go to Gaza if we had wanted to, right? And so now they're actually able to have a delegation to Gaza virtually. So you may want to check it out if you want to get some really on the ground people there and seeing what's going on, instead of just hearing it, you know, secondhand from me or something like that. So that's what their role is.
Okay, all right. Let's see, there's a comment from Ken. Said the problem is, if you are pro-Palestine, you're automatically considered anti-Israel, meaning you're anti-Jewish. That's really true. What has been, and now I noticed Jennifer Harrison. Have you been to Palestine? Go ahead and unmute yourself. We can, yeah.
Yeah, I was supposed to, but then there was a big blow up with the area. It was about maybe 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly what happened. I am in the Dallas local group with Rick Halprin, and
Okay.
so he takes human rights groups to various places, and we were supposed to go to Israel and the West Bank, and it got canceled. And I don't remember, sadly, I don't remember which conflict it was, but I know there were explosions, and the group, it was being led through SMU, the Southern Methodist University. So the university didn't want you know, that happening. But yeah, so I was going to say, I had an Amnesty table once where this guy walked by. So I've had over 50 tables, and there was a guy that walked by, and he said, Amnesty are a bunch of anti-Semites, and you're anti-Israeli, and just went off. And I don't engage with these people, but it's true. If you try to support Palestinians, you're automatically an anti-Semite, which is ridiculous, but it happens. I've been yelled at. But this, I gotta say, this has been such a great meeting. I'm really enjoying this. And I went to Rwanda, so hearing about the Rwandan genocide has been amazing.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for joining our meeting.
For
One last
sure.
question from Bert. It's to everyone. Can you recommend a book or website or anything that will explain the situation in Palestine? So if Bridget or Jennifer or anyone can send me that information, I can forward it to not just Bert, but the whole group here. Okay. Well, I want to thank Dr. Stanton and Bridget for joining us and speaking at our meeting. And you're welcome to join our future meeting. Like I said, we meet at first Monday of each month at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. And I normally send one or two emails a month, so I'm not gonna abuse that power if you share your email address with us. We do have our next meeting is on January 4th. And let's see, that's a reminder for our members. If you have not renewed your membership, please send your membership dues by check to the address in the email that I sent last in my last email. Okay, we are working. Ruth is working on a website where people can make the membership dues or pay the membership dues online. Hopefully, before the next meeting, we will have that website up and running. Okay. And Ruth, do you have anything to add, or Bob?
I just have to say that I'm so honored that I met a descendant of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, just as like a footnote to all that, especially this year. So yeah.
You're not.
Wow. Okay. All
Yeah,
right,
I
guys.
just want to again thank everyone for chiming in. And our membership dues are to remind people we opened up in a bank account and everything, so we're bona fide there. But our membership dues are $20 for individual, 30 for family, and 15 for students. So feel free to join in and to help us out. Thank you again for coming, and we have someone here from Jennifer from Dallas. I appreciate you coming in. So if anyone else is from out of town, thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.